Next up, I'm really pleased to welcome onto stage the wonderful Nic Joost from Cool Fresh International, who's going to talk to us about 8 seconds and you're gone. So over to Nic.
Thanks, Claire. I have two challenges today. First of all, I'm South African by birth, so the accent is a challenge. That's not going to change. And secondly, my age, because I'm about 45 years removed from the target group that I'm going to be talking about. But just bear with me on that one. Let's get the clicker and see that it works. We've called this presentation Generation Z and everything that comes after it. So first of all, let's just look at the definition. Most people refer to Generation Z as being born from 1995 to 2010. I consider myself to be a specialist on Generation Z for this reason. I'd like to introduce you to my two children, or two of my children. The one on the left, Luca, is 16. He spends his complete allowance every month on hair care products, as long as it's organic. It hasn't worked. The one on the right, Milan, is a hardcore musician. He studies English literature. He's a vegetarian. He believes if we all stop eating meat, we're going to save the world. And within this context, I've been trying to sell them into slavery. I've been trying to kick them out of the house, but they're still there. So I really do with my children what most people in fresh produce do with this category. They just like ignore them and hope they'll go away because we don't understand them at all. About a year ago, we looked at Generation Z and we found these statistics, and this is no nonsense. In 3 years from now, they'll form 40% of the world population. They spend 5 hours a day on their smartphones. They have $44 billion in allowance, which they spend. They have an influence on $600 billion of family spending. The parents go to do shopping. The children say, buy bananas or buy apples or whatever, or buy Dr. Pepper. But they spend 20% of their allowance on food in whatever form. So that was reason enough for us to say, let's take a closer look at it. No doubt about it, we call them digital natives, and we cannot ignore them anymore as a company. Why is this important for Cool Fresh? We import fruit and vegetables from all over the world, and we export it to pretty much most countries in Europe. We do a lot of retail work, so for us, it's always important to find concepts and models with which we can assist our retailers to grow sales. And we firmly believe that if we have 40% of the world population in this category 3 years from now, we need to be looking forward and finding out what we can do within our role as a fresh produce supplier. We've built the company on being very creative and doing all sorts of funny things. Part of that was working with universities, working with high schools, in trying to understand consumerism. And then one thing that leads us, this is Warren Buffett, an American investor, always says that in business, the rearview mirror is always a lot clearer than the windshield. So what we try to do is to sort of polish up the windshield so we can look into the future and find new ways of doing things. We call this communicating into the future. And then fortunately, about 9 months ago, this young guy walked into the office. He's a graduate from one of our universities, and he said, I have to do an internship. He was a commercial economics student with a focus on marketing. And together we came up with this idea to develop a project around his internship. And that project we identified as follows. We wanted to use the study to see how we could use Generation Z style communication models to increase our own identity in the market. That's the short version, and specifically for fresh produce with a social character. We agreed that Matteo would do it on a professional basis according to the rules of his university, including internal and external analyses, macro environment, all of the things that you guys know we have to do. He first of all said, let's look at the consumers of the future and how do we think they're going to act in the future? Well, the short answer was that we don't. So Matteo looked at some of the companies who we think really understand this whole idea of Generation Z marketing. First of all, Red Bull, with an unlimited marketing budget, took a guy, they tied him to a balloon, they sent him 30 kilometers or however higher into the sky. They made him jump out, and I think something like 18 million people watched it online at the same time. They said it was a scientific experiment. I say BS, it was pure marketing. It was like the most brilliant marketing thing that anybody had ever done. Coca-Cola created a worldwide community by taking my name and your name and putting it on a bottle, and they just created this wow factor amongst the young consumers. Nike always on the edge, trying to push people to push back boundaries, etc. And really in-your-face, aggressive, attitude-like stuff. And as always, the fresh produce industry also had an answer. Yeah. So, I mean, this was probably the least successful campaign ever, but it's still being used. So within this, we tried to find ways in which we could really move forward. And we found out very quickly that Generation Z brings a big disruption in the market. It will be a huge disruption if we don't act tirelessly. But there are also a lot of interesting opportunities. What we found from Matthijs' research is that 36% of Generation Z actually does the buying of their food themselves. 64% says that somebody else does it for them. But on a scale of 1 to 10, they rated at 7.7 the fact that they have an influence on the people buying the product. So that was the first point of departure. We asked them about making the world a better place. On the left, we asked them how big is the role for us as consumers to make the world better. And they responded sort of, what is that, 97, about 57%. So it's like a 57% importance that they attach to it. But when we asked them how big is the role for companies in terms of the future of the world, they came out at like 40, 70, at 87%. Where they said it's actually the role of companies supplying the consumer market to create a better world. So we found that that for us was an important aspect to take into account. In terms of brand loyalty, they said branding is cool from time to time, but most important is the fact that the story behind a brand and the story of the company behind a brand is by far more important than just the brand itself. What it boiled down to with Generation that it's that stage is we found out that they said, I want it all and I want it now. Well, don't do any protracted advertising campaigns, just give me what I want and give it to me now. We had to look at the basis of the advertising models within Generation Z as it applies to them. And we actually found 5 aspects. And I'll run through it quickly. They said, don't be scared. I want your advertising, but you have to be relevant. So don't give me advertising for old people, give me advertising that works for me. For us, very enlightening because we treat them like fools. What really came out of it is that don't treat us like fools. We know exactly that you're trying to sell us something. So let's get that out of the way. We know you want to sell, we want to buy, now give us the story. 4th thing, don't bore me. So that whole thing of 5 a day and blah, 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 they're not interested in it. And they said, forget about advertising, you have to entertain me. Those were the 5 most important things that we got from them. From the discussions, the focus groups we had, it came out that they wanted us to tell our story, which for me was great because as a company we have like a lot of cool stories to tell, mostly concerning our social responsibility. Because we do a lot of projects in South Africa, we do projects in Costa Rica, we've started up some things in China, we're looking at Peru. So I said, well guys, you know, we have these stories and I have beautiful movies, like 2-minute, 2.5-minute movies that we recorded during our journeys. Then they told me this, they said, well in year 2000, the attention span was 13 seconds. A goldfish has 9 seconds attention span. Generation Z has an average attention span of 8 seconds, so less than a goldfish. And if you haven't convinced them within 3 to 5 seconds, they're gone. They're not interested in your story anymore. So I said, well, I'm out of here. How can I tell my story, and especially projects which we've run over 5 or 6 years, in 3 to 5 seconds? So the guy said, well, give us a chance. And this was Mathieu, the intern that we had, my 2 sons, and some other rats and mice that they'd collected along the way. So have a look.
Games are boring. Movies are boring. Boring. Wait, what's that?
So when I saw that, I said, what the hell? I had no idea. So I said, well, can you please explain to me where this thing came from? I mean, like a gorilla? You see, I also have a gorilla on my chest. And they said, well, for as long as they could remember, I'd been traveling to countries to source fruit. And I've been telling them about all their adventures. And I'll never forget the guys from up north, Mauricio, you'll know, in Pura, I got stuck in the mud at 37 degrees with 1 million mosquitoes around my head. In South Africa, we were developing a social project, and right behind us, there was a hold-up at gunpoint. A guy was robbed of his car. We didn't even know it. So my kids were saying, you've always been telling us about these adventures that you go on. So I said, yeah, that's true, but I mean a gorilla. And they said, well, for us, it was very easy. Because fruit grow on trees. Trees are in a forest, and in the forest you've got gorillas. So that was easy. They brought the gorilla. And they tied the gorilla to our Freedom Fruit brand. Basically, they took the go of adventure, go on adventure. They added the gorilla, and they turned it like into a communication concept, which for us was a complete departure from having a beautiful box with an apple on it saying crunchy and juicy and sweet. It was completely different. I said, but I also have to be able to use this at retail level. So they said, easy, we'll make posters of it and we'll persuade young people to go on adventure with Freedom Fruit, give them a round-the-world ticket as a prize, and let them visit all of these farms and all of these great things that you've seen in your life. Another thing so the gorilla is the thing that will move them into going on adventure. For them also no problem, the gorilla can talk. So the gorilla can say things that we cannot say as old people, as fresh produce marketing things. They can say everything. The gorilla says the best pine's over there. And again, that for us was really difficult to understand that they think differently. And if you look at the way they behave on social media, it actually makes sense because they know everything and their horizons and their perceptions are just completely different to ours. They use the gorilla in human situations, so a gorilla can make a selfie, no problem. And it was all aimed at inspiring them to start exploring the story behind Cool Fresh and the story behind Freedom Fruit. They turned it into a branded clothing thing, where they say you can use that as an incentive. So as people buy Freedom Fruit, they can save and they get free T-shirts, etc., beanies. They even decided that they would be sponsoring active sports with a healthy character, like skateboarding, inline skating, etc. They took it into the streets with billboards at the meeting places. Now in Holland, you all know that we have a very intense public transport system. So it's very easy to identify where these Generation Zs hang out on their way to school or on their way back from university. Another example, also at the bus stops, which it's a bit of, and relatively inexpensive as compared to the traditional television advertising. Gorilla became, for us in the end, the thing that translates passion into attitude and adventure. And that's really what Generation Z is all about. The two main things that came out of it is that you have to deliver on their constantly evolving needs. The needs of Generation Z today is probably not the same as tomorrow or as a week from now. It's constantly evolving. And you have to deliver on it now. So you don't have the opportunity of having a protracted research project to figure out, because while you're doing research, they're changing all the time. And for us, what was the nicest part is you have to make them part of the solution. And this is essentially what we did. And as a result, that was our budget for this whole project. Zero. It cost us nothing. Mathieu was working for us for 6 months. My children got food and bed at home, and that was it. That was their payment. And now they've become so enamored with this whole thing that they keep on pushing out ideas, but really at too fast a pace for us to keep track with. And they're constantly coming up with new ideas and things that we could do. This is where I would normally stop the presentation and say, are there any questions? But since 6 weeks ago, we found out that the train is just moving faster. And now there's another generation behind them, Generation Alpha. And Generation Alpha are the kids born after 2015. 2010. So they're now moving into the 7-8 year category. When we did the preliminary research on Generation Alpha, the following came up. 2.5 million born every week. By 2025, there'll be 2 billion Generation Alphas. That's, in other words, 8 years from now, they'll be 12, 15 years old. They'll be the most formally educated generation, the most technology-supplied generation, and they will be the wealthiest generation ever. So we tried to find very quickly in the space of 6 weeks what the hell is happening with Generation Alpha, because we haven't even started with Z, and now we're on to Alpha again. And we found out by looking at them and doing some research that they're really not kids. They are inquisitive global citizens. Children of 5 have access to a mobile telephone, they have access to an iPad, and they're experiencing more things than what we imagine. Unless you're a very strict parent, it's almost impossible to protect your children from the impulses of the world out there. We then did a quick thing and we decided to give Gorilla a baby, a little baboon, not a baboon, what's that, an ape, a monkey. But again, with Generation Alpha, it's not enough, and that's where I differ from a lot of people who take a cartoon character and stick it on a box and say that will inspire children to buy. I tried to find ways in which we can make this monkey work to the benefit of Generation Alpha. So we came up with this idea of having playing cards with all of the different fruits. One side there's the fruit, on the back side you've got the name of the fruit in 8 different languages or 7 different languages, because children are inquisitive and they would want to know what is a naranja or whatever, what is an orange in Spanish, and in this way they could learn a little bit about other languages. But being technology supplied, it's the easiest thing in the world to develop an app. If a child looks at his telephone and he sees an apple and he presses on the button, it says apple, and maybe in Swedish it says apple, and it says la manzanilla or whatever, and in that way you can help them develop literacy in other languages. It's also a concept which works really well with cooperative branding, so we could go to Lego, we could go to Duplo, we could do all sorts of things. And maybe along the same lines as what McDonald's is doing with Happy Meals, have these incentives which they could save for. So we get them to go back to the store. And on a side track, we have at this point in time at one of our retailers, Albert Heijn in Holland, we have a campaign where they are handing out cards about space. So it's like the big year of space in Holland. And trying to get into the supermarket is almost like trying to get to a Manchester United game. I mean, there's like children everywhere, and they're just waiting for people to come out with cards. So we believe that there's a whole possibility, if you tackle it in the right way, to really create a movement with kids based on these concepts. And especially for the mothers, we can also do fridge magnets of the baboon with all of his family around it. If you ask me how to do this, I believe there's only one way, and that's, I'm actually one step ahead. Digging deep into Generation Alpha, exactly the same as with the Generation Z. They want stuff now, you have to be ahead of them actually to identify what it is that you should be doing, and you should make them part of the solution. So if I could have my dream for every fresh produce company, is that we should all go away next week and employ a couple of 15 or 16-year-olds or 6 and 7-year-olds as consultants to our businesses. And we laugh at that, but one of our biggest banks probably in the world, ABN AMRO, actually has a group of 5 16-year-olds who act as advisors to them on social media. They tell them what to do with Snapchat. They tell them what to do with all of these things. And yet we hold on to all of the stuff that we were doing 20 years ago, and we think that it's still going to work. What do I believe? Social media is the way that you need to go. And the balls has nothing to do with football. you need to be able to think out of the box and do things that are not comfortable for you, and enough said, that are not comfortable. Let me give an example of a guy who in 2011 set up a stupid company, just straightforward about razor blades, and he set it up at his home, and 6 years later he sold it to Unilever for reportedly $1 billion in cash. He laid the basis of his company with this film, which exploded onto social media in 2011.
Hi, I'm Mike, founder of DollarShaveClub.com. What is DollarShaveClub.com? Well, for $1 a month, we send high-quality razors right to your door. Yeah, $1. Are the blades any good? No. Our blades are f***ing great.
And that's the story of social media done completely the other way. This guy had the guts, let's call it the balls, to make a film of himself, and he essentially told his story in 5 seconds. Blades, $1 a month, and it's great. And if I could challenge fresh produce companies to go and find their own story and tell it, you don't have to swear, but tell it in a way that consumers will respond to it, out of the box, in your face, I reckon we will make a big difference in this industry. Thanks, Claire.
Thank you so much, Nic. I'm sure we must have some questions because that was brilliant. Who would like to ask the first question?
Before there are any questions, I just have to tell you that we had 1,200 seconds. I had 55 slides, which is around 20 seconds per slide. So if this were a Generation Z thing, they would have been gone a long time ago. And if I have to speak to Generation Z, then this is how it comes across to them. They're completely different to us, and we have to understand that.
Has anyone got any questions while we've got Nic? None at all. You're getting away lightly,
I
Nic.
told you, it's a lot of nonsense.
Please, may we put our hands together to thank Nic. Thank you.
Thank you.